as together we take another look at the stories that are shaping our world.
We are broadcasting live to YouTube from Middle East Eye's headquarters here in London.
I'm Mohammed Hassan.
And I'm Matilda Mallinson. Today is Tuesday, the 27th of May.
So there is an evolving story that is ongoing right now on the ground in Gaza as we speak in Rafah, where it was supposed to be the first day of aid distribution by this company that was set up by the Americans and the Israelis. It was meant to replace UNRWA and other groups.
The Gaza Humanitarian Foundation.
That's the one. And yet it has not gone according to plan. We are seeing scenes of chaos from the ground in Gaza. What is exactly happening? We are going to continue to update you as the show goes along.
Mm-hmm. But sadly, the militarized and chaotic scenes that we are seeing now were predicted by many experts and Palestinians, including people we spoke to, and we will be bringing viewers their voices, including the voices of UNRWA chief Philippe Lazzarini. But before that, we'll be speaking to British surgeon Victoria Rose, who is currently in Gaza, about the devastation that she and other doctors are experiencing under intensified violence in the enclave under Israel's Gideon's chariot. This is the expanded operations that are happening on the ground right now. Mohammed, then you were taking the show someplace new.
Yeah, so this week actually marks the 3-year anniversary since a trove of leaked documents emerged from within the Xinjiang police forces in northern China. This marked the first time that we had seen what exactly was happening inside these internment camps, where more than 1 million Uyghur Muslim Chinese were essentially being disappeared. China has refused to acknowledge anything that's happening in the Xinjiang region, and yet Uyghur activists have been screaming for years and years about their plight and about what's happening in their communities. So we're taking a look at exactly what was in that trove of documents, and we're speaking to one of their most prominent spokespeople about exactly what is happening today and why we should still be paying attention.
First, though, let's take a look at the headlines.
An aid distribution point set up by Americans in Gaza has descended into chaos, with footage showing a stampede of people desperately scrambling to reach food as mercenaries fire on crowds. The drop point was set up by a controversial company called the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, backed by the US and Israel as a replacement to UNRWA and other humanitarian groups operating in Gaza. Shortly after setting up in Rafah and forcing Palestinians to queue in tightly packed fences, reports say the contractors quickly abandoned their post and began firing into the air following a rush from the crowd. In a statement released shortly before by GHF, the company says it was overwhelmed by the crowds and decided to withdraw to allow people to, quote, take aid safely and dissipate in order to avoid casualties. But Gaza's media office says Israeli forces then fired into the crowd, resulting in a number of injuries. Now, since early March, Israel has denied the entry of all aid into Gaza, including food, clean water, and medicine, leaving more than 2 million Palestinians on the brink of starvation. Last week, the government began letting in a trickle of aid, which humanitarian groups described as grossly insufficient to address Gaza's deepening crisis. And we'll be playing you part of our interview with UNRWA Commissioner General Philippe Lazzarini later in the show.
Hundreds of Israeli settlers stormed the Al-Aqsa Mosque and its surrounding areas in Jerusalem on Monday to mark the so-called Jerusalem Day. Starting late Monday morning, groups of young Israeli men roamed through the city, targeting locals with harassment and violence. They were reported to have spat at women wearing hijabs, looted cafes, vandalized a bookshop, and forcibly entered Palestinian homes. Thousands of Israelis also gathered at the Western Wall to perform prayers on a day designed to celebrate the Israeli occupation of East Jerusalem after the 1967 war. Far-right National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir was amongst over 2,000 Israeli settlers who marched towards the Al-Aqsa compound. They were filmed, videoed, waving Israeli flags and chanting "Death to Arabs."
And finally, 800 British lawyers have signed a letter demanding the British government sanction Israel in line with its own legal requirements. The legal professionals, which included former Supreme Court justices, academics, and retired senior judges, have urged the UK to uphold its international legal responsibilities by imposing sanctions on the Israeli government and its officials. They've also called for the UK to push for the revoking of Israel's UN membership. Last week, the UK Foreign Secretary David Lammy announced the suspension of free trade negotiations with Israel.
I'm announcing that we have suspended negotiations with this Israeli government on a new free trade agreement. We will be reviewing cooperation with them under the 2030 bilateral roadmap. The Netanyahu's government's actions have made this necessary. Madam Deputy Speaker, today, my honourable friend, the Minister for the Middle East, is summoning the Israeli ambassador to the Foreign Office to convey this message.
But just days after the speech, the UK's trade envoy to Israel, Lord Ian Austin, was in Tel Aviv, celebrating the partnership between the two countries. In an op-ed published last week titled, quote, "We'd be foolish to sever our trade links," Lord Austin said trade with Israel was in the national interest and that the government's decision to pause negotiations would not change this. Stay tuned now as we're joined live from Gaza by Dr. Victoria Rose as we examine the question of aid and Israel's ongoing military expansion.
This is MEELive's Deep Dive, where we dive into a story shaking up the world. Israel's intensifying assaults on Gaza have alienated even its staunchest allies over the past week, with German Chancellor Friedrich Merz calling the airstrikes on Tuesday no longer comprehensible. The unprecedented condemnation by Germany comes 3 weeks after Israel's Security Cabinet approved Operation Gideon's Chariot, with the aim of seizing total control of the Gaza Strip. Gaza's health ministry announced 79 more people were killed in the past 24 hours, bringing Gaza's known death toll over 54,000 since the start of the war. This count started hours after the bombing of Fahmi al-Jajawi school on Monday, in which 36 people were killed while taking shelter in the building. Israel said the bomb targeted a Hamas control center. Middle East Eye spoke to a 5-year-old survivor whose mother and 6 siblings burnt to death in the blaze.
طلعت من النار والنار حرقتنا من ايديا وكان واقع علي السقف انا قلت انت عمتي بعدين ما عرفتش امشي على النار وتول اسعاف كل ما تتصورش عشان ايدك ما ترجعكيش حتى عشان ايديا مجرحين مولعت النار ما قدرتش امشي بالمدرسة. بعدين انا قلت بالمدرسة اتصورت بعدين ماما وبابا راحوا على الشفا وماما كانت مستشهدة. أخت الكبيرة الله يرحمها استشهدت عابد ومحمد وأمل وأخت ماريا وسلوان وبس كلهم استشهدوا إلا أنا نفسي بخواتي.
Children account for at least half of those killed in that strike. And over 17,000 children have now been killed in total, as aid groups warn a further 930,000 children are at risk of famine due to severe aid restrictions by the Israeli military. Dr. Victoria Rose is a British senior plastic and reconstructive surgeon who has been on multiple medical missions to Gaza since October the 7th and is currently working at Nasser Hospital in the south of the Strip. Victoria, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
You've been in Gaza
Sorry
at different...
about the chaos in the background.
That's all right. Perfectly understandable. Victoria, you've been in Gaza at different stages of this war, and now we are seeing perhaps the most intensive offensive yet from Israel. Does it feel as though it's intensified, and what does that look like from where you're standing?
It feels absolutely crazy here. It's the worst I've ever seen it in Gaza. We are struggling to keep up with the work. It's just non-stop. We are getting patient after patient after patient through the door. We're unable to keep up with the dressing changes, the debridements. I see people that I want to add to the list. There's no space. People are waiting days before I can get them on the operating table. It's never, ever been like this before. We are absolutely rammed and we are running out of supplies.
This increased need, of course, is coming in the context of a blockade that's causing severe shortages of supply. How do you prioritize? What do you prioritize, and what gets missed when you have to prioritize?
Well, we've been doing a bit of a scrap heap challenge on the kit that we've got, but we're now at that stage where the items that we're short of are not items that we can substitute. So they are scalpel blades and cleaning solutions before we operate, and gauze. Gauze is our massive issue at the moment. At NASA now, they have removed gauze swabs from all of the wards, and they are only allowed to be used in the emergency department and the operating room. And we were told we have a box that should last us until the end of this week, and we are just praying that we get some more aid delivered to us before then, because without this, we cannot continue to operate.
Gaza is said to be the deadliest place on earth to be a child. We're seeing a child killed every 45 minutes, and of course, many more injured. 57 children are known to have died from starvation. 71,000 children under 5 are at risk of acute malnourishment. How many patients coming into your care are children as an overall proportion, and how are you meeting this need?
It's at least 50%, and they are quite young children. So they are children between the ages of 2 and 10. We are really struggling with the children more than anything, because they are the ones that have been hit the hardest by malnutrition. So they are suffering horrific blast injuries, and we are trying to clean those injuries and close them in a timely fashion. But because of the malnutrition, they do not have the resources to heal these wounds. And worse than that, they are more susceptible to infection. And at the moment, we only have 3 antibiotics here at NASA, and none of them are the antibiotics that I would routinely use in the UK for these types of wounds. So the children are really suffering with infection. We lost a 4-year-old last week to overwhelming sepsis, and that is a preventable death. That would not have happened if that child had been in the UK.
Are you also seeing military injuries with the children coming in for surgeries and treatment?
All we're seeing in the children is blast injuries. I had child after child after child that has had their knee blown off, their arm blown off, their hand blown off. We have a girl upstairs at the moment that's had both her legs blown off. It's horrific, the injuries these children are suffering from.
I believe that Gaza now has the largest cohort of child amputees in the world. But of course, there's the additional problem of psychological trauma. You said in the past that psychological trauma can actually slow down or prevent a child's physical recovery. Is that a problem you're seeing, and can you explain that to us?
It's stress. It's the stress that causes a reduction in wound healing capacity, and it's something that we're very aware of in the medical profession. A lot of these children are absolutely distraught by the fact that they have lost their families in the blast injuries that they survived. We see so many children here that have been orphaned. There are 42,000 orphaned children in Gaza at the moment, and a huge number of children who have one sole survivor in their family. At the moment, on our ward upstairs, we have 2 brothers who both have devastating injuries to their lower limbs, and they are both the only members of their family. The issue is that they are so distraught from the loss that they've suffered that their reserves are lowered even further. So this is the additional problem that we're seeing in the children.
Victoria, your colleague Dr. Ala Al-Najjar lost 9 of her 10 children in an airstrike on Friday while she was on shift. I believe her husband and her surviving son are being treated at your hospital. Can you give us any update on this situation or anything that you would like to share in response to it?
Yes, I operated on Adam today. He's got an injury to his right arm. So basically, the explosion has taken a massive chunk out of his left arm. He's got a fracture of his humerus, which my orthopedic colleagues have fixed with an external frame. And I've repaired, myself and my colleague Tom repaired his radial nerve today. He's also had a significant head injury, although somebody of his age is likely to make a good recovery from that. So we're very hopeful. But he's peppered in shrapnel injuries. So he is somebody that we will be seeing again before we leave.
These attacks on children and these attacks on medics and medics' homes, it seems that no one is safe. 1,400 healthcare workers have been killed in Gaza, many others abducted and tortured. I believe over 100 are currently known to be in Israeli detention. Do you fear for yourself and for your Palestinian colleagues in particular?
I really fear for my Palestinian colleagues because they have got no way out of this at the moment, so they're here for the duration. We've had an evacuation order last week that was really worrying, and actually 4 of our theatre staff had to leave the theatre complex to go and evacuate their families because they were all living in that area. I am the most concerned I've ever been about my own safety. I think this is the first time where I've really worried. The active fighting zone is about 1.5 kilometers from us now. I'm hopeful that the IDF are aware that there are about 20 foreign doctors here at NASA, and that is Americans, British, French, Egyptian. So I would hope that they would be sensible enough to know that taking out this part of NASA at the moment would lead to some unrest from a lot of other countries, but that hasn't really stopped them before, so it is just hope. But yeah, it is definitely the worst it's ever been at the moment.
Victoria, thank you for your time. I understand it's precious. Before we lose you, there is one update I'm wondering if you can help us with. I'm not sure whether you're aware, but Israel's new aid plan came into action today, facilitated by a US-based private organization. Already, we're seeing scenes of chaos at the distribution in Rafah, not too far from you, including military gunfire. Is there anything that you're able to tell us about this situation?
There's nothing I'm able to tell you, as I haven't really had a chance to catch up with the news. But the one thing I can say is I have no idea why we need a second company to come into Gaza to distribute food aid when the United Nations and the WHO were doing this fantastically in the past. The only issue that the United Nations and the WHO have had is that Israel have hampered their operation. If they were allowed to work freely, we don't need anyone else delivering aid to Gaza. These organizations have been doing it for a very long time and are very good at it.
Thank you. We do have some footage from the ground, but as you've said yourselves, that there are so few journalists in Gaza, or so few journalists allowed into Gaza who are not Palestinian and are not being discredited by Israel, that it falls upon doctors like yourself to be reporters for news outlets like us. Dr. Victoria Rose, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
The intense violence now unfolding in Gaza coincides with the launching of a new aid plan that has descended into chaos. Israeli soldiers fired warning gunshots at starving Palestinians after US security contractors lost control of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation's first aid operation. Thousands of Palestinians stormed the site of the distribution, which was being policed by Israeli soldiers and private US mercenaries using weapons and barbed wire fencing. The controversial non-profit launched operations today, despite lacking the support of experienced humanitarian groups who have refused to comply with the US and Israeli-backed operation. On Thursday's programme, UN spokesperson James Elder explained to us their reasons for objecting.
The capacity isn't there. The distribution points are not there. There's no discussion about, medicines, anesthetics. What we know is that they seem to be a private sector, not a charity, a private sector organisation designed to support the forced displacement of people from the north to the south against every single humanitarian principle and utterly unworkable.
The man who was supposed to lead this pilot project, former US Marine Jake Wood, resigned on Sunday, echoing external criticisms that the group did not fulfill the principles of humanity, neutrality, impartiality, and independence. The foundation rejected this and pledged to feed 1 million Palestinians by the end of the week. But Palestinian journalist Mohammed Shahada warned us people in Gaza would not be comfortable retrieving aid under the conditions the group had set.
Every single person I spoke to in Gaza said one has to be completely insane, out of their minds, to step a foot in those heavily militarized concentration camps that Israel is setting up in Rafah, where you have to pass through numerous checkpoints with Israeli genocidal soldiers teeming around it, waiting to ambush whoever they want. And you have to pass through facial recognition technology, fingerprinting, different layers of screening and vetting with undisclosed criteria. And at the end of it, you have to literally walk from Beit Hanun, 41 kilometers to Rafah, to pick up a package that would weigh 20 to 40 kilos, and then 41 kilometers back under constant bombardment, thinking that you will make it back alive. Nobody in Gaza thinks that if you step a foot in those compounds, you will make it back home alive on your feet. Either you will be killed on the way, you will be kidnapped by the Israeli soldiers, you will be blackmailed into collaborating with Israel, or the food that you would get would be looted on.
In a yet unreleased interview, MEE news editor Sondos Asim also spoke to UNRWA chief Philippe Lazzarini, who went a step further in explaining Israel's intentions with this new aid plan. He repeated the criticism that aid was being used to displace Palestinians through the south, but added that the intention was to displace them permanently by introducing a new aid model that undermines one of Israel's greatest political threats in the region, UNRWA. UNRWA, which stands for the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine refugees in the Near East, validates the refugee status of Palestinians in territory now occupied by Israel, and therefore, by extension, it validates their right to return home. Here's Philippe Lazzarini speaking to our reporter Sondos Asim in Geneva.
It's a plan which falls short to align or abide to basic humanitarian principles such as independence, impartiality, but also humanity. What we know about this foundation is that they are opening now 4 different secure areas in the south of Gaza, where people would be asked to go once they have been vetted and cleared to pick up the assistance for the household and from this place to go back where they are currently living. What does it mean? Until now, we had more than 400 distribution places in Gaza. The assistance were brought where the people are. Now with the new system, the people are asked to go in 4 different locations, which means it is forcing the people to move from where they are and in fact to regroup around this distribution cluster. So it becomes an instrument of a forced displacement of the population. And we know today, and it has been clearly stated, that one of the objectives of the ongoing military operation is to force the population to move from the north to the south. Secondly, the system itself requires people vetted, cleared, so not everybody will be able to go. which means number of people will be discriminated when it comes to the humanitarian assistance, but also you need to be in a good health to be able to walk hundreds of meters, if not kilometers, to go to pick up your parcel of food and to go back to your family, which also de facto would eliminate from the distribution scheme the female head household, for example, or the most vulnerable or elderly people in the Gaza Strip. So for all these reasons, because the aid is not being provided where the people are and where they're in need, it is not possible for an humanitarian organization which truly respect basic humanitarian principle to adhere to such a scheme.
Practically speaking, do you think it's not gonna work? Is it gonna succeed in its declared mission?
I mean, practically speaking, I doubt that this will, if the intent is to provide humanitarian assistance to all the population in need in Gaza, I do not think that such a model will succeed. But this model seems also to be put in place in order to support, I would say, more a military objective than a real humanitarian concern.
And the announcement of this plan has also been coupled with very clear declarations of intention by Prime Minister Netanyahu, for example, yesterday, that he intends to fully reoccupy the entire Gaza Strip. What do you make of these statements right now? And as a humanitarian concerned with the plight of Palestinian refugees, do you think it's a prelude to a second Nakba?
Well, I mean, the weeks to come will tell us how the situation will unfold, but indeed, we hear about the intent of a full military occupation. We hear about the intent to force the entire population currently in the north of the Gaza Strip to go down to the south of Gaza Strip. And we also hear the intent from members of the current Security Cabinet to push after that the people in the south outside of Gaza. So for the Palestinian, indeed, leaving their land, or if Gaza is no land for Palestinians anymore, it will be considered by them as being their second Nakba.
How is the status of UNRWA right now inside Gaza, and we'll talk later about the West Bank as well? Given that most of your premises have already been attacked or destroyed by the Israeli army over the past 19 months, 1,300 of your employees have been killed in bombardment. How are you functioning in Gaza right now? How many staff members do you have?
Yeah, that's true that our staff are working and operating under extreme, I would say, adverse and hostile environment. As of today, we have more than 310 staff who have been killed since the beginning of the war in October 2023. We have more than 200 premises which have been damaged or completely destroyed. We have operations which have been attacked. We had staff having been arrested and tortured. We even had 2 weeks ago a staff who has been summarily executed, along 15 medics from the Palestinian Red Crescent. So it's an extraordinary, I would say, hostile environment. And now it is true that UNRWA has been and continue to be under unabated political attack. There are a number of disinformation campaigns taking place. There are even commercial campaign paid by the government taking place with the aim to try to discredit the agencies, because we know that today the objective for the Israeli government is to dismantle the agency, and the real reason behind it is because they want once for all to strip the Palestinian from the refugee status, with the belief that if this happens, it will put an end once for all to the question of the right of return.
That was UNRWA Chief Philippe Lazzarini, interviewed by MEE's news editor Sondos Asim. You can listen to the full-length interview on the upcoming episode of her podcast, Expert Witness. Israel has said that the new aid plan, which gives Israeli military oversight of access, is necessary to prevent aid getting into the hands of Hamas. But speaking on CBS on Sunday, Director of the World Food Programme Cindy McCain rejected this claim and said chaos during food distributions are due to Palestinians starving to death rather than Hamas or organised crime.
Have you seen evidence that it is Hamas stealing the food?
No, not at all. Not in this round. Listen, these people are desperate, and they see a World Food Program truck coming in, and they run for it. This doesn't have anything to do with Hamas or any kind of organized crime or anything. It has simply to do with the fact these people are starving to death. And so we will continue to go in. We will continue to go in with food and the kinds of supplies that we need to help the bakeries operate and make sure that we can continue to do that and hopefully be able to do more of it. But again, we can't do this unless the world community puts pressure on this. We can't be allowed to sit back and watch these people starve to death with no outside diplomatic influence to help us.
Now, on the topic of global pressure, our next segment marks 3 years from when the international community was made aware of Uyghur prison camps in China via a huge Xinjiang police leak. Mohammed has the story.
Has the world turned its back on the Uyghurs? The Muslim minority living in China's northern Xinjiang district have, for more than a decade now, warned that a systemic erasure of their people and culture was underway. Uyghurs who made it out of China spoke of internment camps, where hundreds of thousands of ordinary people were kidnapped from their homes and disappeared. Some return with marks of torture, some never return. Those left behind are scarred into silence. Their homes are monitored, their phones are tapped, the ways they practice their religion is policed. Facing the might of the Chinese state, the Uyghurs had no recourse for justice but to turn to the world. And for a time, Western voices rallied to their aid. Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch published damning reports. The United States and others labeled what was happening in Xinjiang as a genocide against the Uyghur people. But China refused to cave in. It maintained no one's rights were being violated, that those taken from their homes were being sent to, quote, re-education camps to be taught about Chinese unity and given jobs to help their families. In a recent interview with Middle East Eye's podcast Unapologetic, former Chinese official Victor Gao dismissed claims that Uyghurs were being persecuted for their identity, saying that China was instead fighting against separatist forces.
Yes, indeed, there are some terrorists, especially involving the Uyghurs. Do you know what's their real goal? Their real goal is to separate Xinjiang away from China, to establish a kind of what they call East Turkmenistan Caliphate in Xinjiang. Now, let me tell you, this will never be possible. It's dead before it is put onto the table. China will never allow Xinjiang to be separated away from China to become a so-called separate country or independent country. So it's not a human rights issue. It is whether you abide by the Chinese law, which dictates that no one in China should ever indulge in any activity which may be aimed at separation of any part of China away from China. So when you talk about the Uyghurs or some of the issues involved in Xinjiang, it's not a human rights issue. It is, if it ever exists, whether there are people with the aid and abetting of foreign forces which want to separate Xinjiang away from China.
3 years ago this week, the world finally got a peek inside these so-called re-education camps when an explosive trove of documents hacked from the Xinjiang police was leaked to the media. The cache of documents, which included thousands of reports and photos from inside one of the camps holding thousands of Uyghur students, showed detainees bound and blindfolded as they were interrogated by police. The documents also outlined a shoot-to-kill policy for anyone attempting to escape the facilities. But today, the voices of Uyghurs seem more faint than ever before, and the rise of China as a world leader has convinced many to overlook their human rights record in favor of better ties. Rahima Mahmoud is an Uyghur human rights activist, singer, and advisor to the Inter-Parliamentary Alliance on China. I spoke with her earlier today, beginning with the Xinjiang police leak. This week marks 3 years since that explosive trove of leaked documents from Xinjiang police. What has that leak taught us about what is happening in those detention centers in Xinjiang?
Yes, the Xinjiang police files offered undeniable first-hand evidence of the scale and brutality of the repression in my homeland. For the first time, the world saw classified internal documents and the photographs proving the existence of internment camps, mass incarceration of Uyghurs without trial, and a shoot-to-kill policies. Policy for those who try to escape. And these weren't just statistics, and they were faces, names, and directives straight from the top of the Chinese Communist Party. And for those of us in exile, it was heartbreaking confirmation of what we feared and tried to expose for years, especially since 2017.
And what do you understand the situation to be today, 3 years on?
Well, the situation has not changed. It's still the same. My own situation as I spoke, my first interview about being cut off from my own family, and that's still the case. I learned from a kind-hearted informer 2 years ago that my sister, my eldest sister, passed away. My eldest brother were in 3 different camps, released because he was almost dying, but luckily he survived. And I don't have any information about any other relatives or my other sisters or brothers. And I understand they had to denounce me, in order to stay safe. We know that China has been promoting tourism. Forced labor is in a global scale, exporting from textile to solar panels, and the credible reports revealed the mass number, millions of Uyghurs are being forced into slave labor.
Now, I want to ask about the textile industry because I think it's a really particularly important conversation to have. But tell me a little bit more about your own situation. You haven't spoken to your family now for what is coming on 8 years. Why is that? What is it? What makes it difficult for you to be able to get in touch with your loved ones?
So the last time when I spoke to my brother, after 3 months, I couldn't get hold of anyone. It was in January 2017. And when I asked him why no one is answering my phone call, and he said they did the right thing. and leave us in God's hands, and we leave you in God's hand too. And through this informer, I learned that he was the one who was detained and in 3 different camps. Anyone who receive phone calls or make phone calls abroad, that is one of the criteria that you can be targeted. And it's not because I don't want to contact anyone. Even I tried a Chinese friend for him to contact my family when he went back to visit his own family. He didn't dare. He said, you know, because of this high-tech surveillance, the system is so scary that your phone it can be tracked down. And then if you call the people, especially like my family, they are the kind of key families that targeted by the government because of my activism and my high-profile activism in the UK. And therefore, I could put my sisters and my brothers in great danger. And I also learned that they already denounced me publicly, or saying that we don't have such sister.
And that high-tech surveillance that you described, which is used from the reports that we understand to monitor people inside their homes, in their workplaces, to make sure that they're not taking part in any anti-Chinese activity. But that surveillance also goes beyond China's own borders. Last week, there was a report that we filed from Turkey where the Turkish government had found that there was cells of Chinese spies using fake cell networks to spy on Uyghur activists and refugees in Istanbul and in other cities. What is the cost for people like yourselves, but many others that are on the outside, but that are choosing to use their voices to speak out?
Speaking out comes with enormous risks, as I mentioned earlier. I've experienced surveillance, intimidation, and online abuse. Many of us have been warned by officials that our activism could endanger our families back home. And I've spoken to many other Uyghurs living in this country as well, who never attend any demonstrations or any activism, but they receive threats as well. And I know some Uyghurs received phone call from public security and state security police, and received order to monitor my work, be friend with me, and report my work to them. So this is such a common method. The transnational repression is in such horrifying scale. I know a doctor, a doctor who worked in Turkey for about over 10 years and had to flee Turkey and come here to seek asylum because the Chinese government arrested his son, who was also a doctor. And they said, unless you work for us, you work as a spying for us, we will not release your son.
Now, we earlier in this week, we spoke to Chinese analyst and former official Victor Gao and put questions to him about what is happening in Xinjiang, what is happening to the Uyghurs, and he dismissed any claims of human rights abuses. He said that the Uyghurs were like any other minority in China, expressing and living there with their full rights. And further than that, we just heard from him a little bit earlier in the program that he said that what was happening, what China was doing, was trying to shut down separatist forces in Xinjiang, people that were trying to break off from the Chinese state and form their own state, their own nation. And this is why China was exercising its right, in his words, to be able to keep China together. What do you make of those remarks?
That is the standard narrative China uses to justify its oppression. But the truth is, Uyghurs have been stripped of their most basic rights: freedom of religion, language, movement, and even thoughts. Labeling our culture and calls for dignity as separatism is a way to criminalize our identity. The vast majority of Uyghurs want to live with dignity and freedom. What China is fighting is not terrorism or separatism, but a people's existence. The Uyghur Gaos claim that Uyghur enjoy full rights like other ethnic groups in China is a stark distortion of reality. And the brutal truth is a complete opposite. Uyghurs face mass detention, surveillance, cultural erasure, forced labor. China's so-called fight against separatism is simply a pretext to justify widespread repression and control. The example is the response of the Chinese ambassador to the UK when Andrew Marr showed him, I don't know if you remember that, Andrew Marr show invited the ambassador to the UK and showed him the footage of blindfolded and shackled Uyghur men. Instead of addressing what was happening when he was asked, what's happening there? What is happening here? And he said, Xinjiang is a beautiful place. Didn't respond to that footage, didn't even look at that footage. And he said Xinjiang is a beautiful place. And this is a kind of denial, and propaganda only highlights how far the Chinese government is from acknowledging the suffering of the Uyghur people. The reality on the ground is, one of oppression, not rights. The world must see through these false narratives and hold China accountable. And people like myself and many thousands of Uyghurs living in exile, they can tell their own story. Each Uyghur person, have their own story. I know some Uyghurs lost 40 members, 40 to 50 relatives, extended families into this vast, the so-called re-education camps, which is modern-day concentration camps.
Now, if I can ask you about the issue of forced labor, because this is one of the accusations that the Chinese state has tried to shrug, that some of these re-education camps are actually being used to work with textile industries, textile factories, the creation of fast fashion in particular that has taken over the world over the last couple of years. Companies like Shein have been accused of using cotton made by forced labor, and you and others have been active here in the UK to try and get the government to shift away, put laws in place against the use of cotton that comes from the Xinjiang region. Tell us, how could you describe what exactly is the issue with companies like Shein, and where this fast fashion that everybody is using and wearing, where that really comes from?
So the cost of fast fashion isn't, measured in pounds or dollars, but in lives and dignity. The clothes made cheaply and quickly for Western markets often carry the hidden stain of forced labor, forced Uyghur labor. And we've seen from some TikTok videos that was shared on social media, and also some survivors of these camps. I know one Kazakh survivor live in this country after he gave evidence at the Uyghur tribunal, and he was forced to work in a textile factory inside the camp. And he said majority of those so-called workers, the slaves, are women, were women. And he said they were given such huge tasks that they can never be able to finish. And then when they couldn't, then they were deprived food, sleep, and even beaten up. And we've seen, clear links between the, company like Shein, the major brands, Shein and others, profit a system built on coercion and exploitation. Every item made this way, through cheap slave labor. Many Uyghurs never get paid for working 12, 14, even 16 hours inside those factories. So every item made this way perpetuates suffering and emboldens a regime that's committing crimes against humanity. And I think, consumers should really think twice when they, buy any cheap products made in China, because this is not only limited the products that is made in the Uyghur region, but because mass number of Uyghurs forced move to other parts of China, the Chinese provinces, and live in a prison-like conditions in these factories and forced to work.
Now, one of the difficulties that I imagine you and other activists have faced is that you are fighting against the inevitable rise and dominance of China on the global scene. The phrase, the China century, is something that gets repeated over and over again. And increasingly, many countries, specifically in the global south, have looked to China as a potential leader, a replacement for the role that the United States has established and dominated over the last 50 years. And looking to China as this leader that could lead the way forward in this new century, do you feel that this is a mistake?
Definitely. Definitely. As Uyghur, especially for, Muslim world, it really hurt me. It's very, very painful. As Uyghur, we are part of the Muslim Ummah, and we are suffering. Our mosques have been destroyed, our Qur'ans burned, our people imprisoned for praying or fasting. So we need solidarity, not silence. So I have a message to the leaders of the Muslim world, especially, to speak up for justice, to support those fleeing persecution, and to pressure China to end these atrocities. I would also like to, call on the public as well. While political advocacy is important, I also want to speak directly to the Muslim public. You have incredible power as consumers and the voices for justice. By choosing to boycott goods made with forced labor from the Uyghur region, you can send a strong message to companies and the governments that human rights cannot be ignored for profit, for consumer power, because it matters. Also, for example, this conversation, I believe it would raise awareness and educate a lot of people. So we would people to also really use their platform to speak up in communities, mosques, social networks. Sharing the Uyghur story helps break the silence and pressure decision makers. And finally, I urge people to support the Stop Uyghur Genocide campaign, which I lead with donation. We desperately need financial support to continue our vital work in documenting abuses, advocating for Uyghurs, and helping refugees. And together, your voices and the contributions can make a real difference in this fight for justice.
And that was Rahima Mahmoud, the executive director of the group Stop Uyghur Genocide. If you're interested in listening to our full interview with Chinese analyst and former official Victor Gao that my colleague Ashfaq Karim did, you can listen to his podcast, Unapologetic. That is available on YouTube and all podcast platforms. And that is all the news that we have for you today. But before we lose you, we would love to hear from you.
Please do send in your comments and questions. You can do so on the YouTube page. You can also contact us across social media platforms at Middle East Eye or email meelive@middleeasteye.net.
Make sure you hit that notification bell so you know exactly when we're going live. It happens right here every Tuesday, every Thursday, 5 p.m. British Standard Time or 12 p.m. if you are in New York.
See you then.